This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show.
So I got a very special guest on, but I first want to say, in the past almost 2 years since COVID started, over 55 million people have filed for unemployment at some point or other in the United States. And obviously with only about a little over 100 million jobs, that's significantly greater than ever before in history. And I think a lot of people, including me, went through the same thing. What do I do now? Like I don't have the normal routine that I had, but maybe I can, instead of being scared or terrified, which I know many people were, this is also an opportunity to pursue something I love doing, or pursue something I loved as a child, or pursue something I always thought I would put off until I had stuff saved up, or until I retired, or whatever. Like, who knows what it could be? Some people maybe wanted to be a chef. Some people wanted to be a novelist. Some people might have wanted to make videos or play golf or whatever it is. I don't know. And a couple of years ago, I had on a good friend, Todd Herman, who wrote a book called The Alter Ego Effect. And he's been a great keynote speaker over the years, including during the pandemic, but he also coaches a lot of like athletes and other high performance experts, to be the best they could be in their fields. And I remember from The Alter Ego Effect that sometimes, I remember specifically, this was in the first chapter, that sometimes like a baseball player, before they go up to hit, they might imagine themselves or to be somebody else, like a better baseball player, or I don't know. I might not even be describing this correctly. My memory might be off. Todd could fill us in a second. But I used to do this a lot in comedy, and Todd's listening to this. Before I would go on stage on stand-up comedy, I might imagine I was some great comedian that I admired, and I wouldn't imitate any of their jokes, of course, but it would give me this extra confidence. And I remember one time I was pitching a TV show, and I called Todd and I said, Todd, I'm really nervous going in to pitch this TV show. What should I do? And he gave me really just great advice. And the advice is always different each time. And I wrote to him again because, like many people, I'm pursuing something that I love doing. And some of you know, I've been playing in chess tournaments again for the first time in 25 years. I was a nationally ranked master in 1997 and as a kid. And now I'm playing in tournaments again, and it's really hard. Like, the world has changed in the 25 years I stopped playing. And so I was hoping Todd could tell me a little bit more what to do in that alter ego effect way he has. And Todd, thanks for joining the podcast.
Yeah, well, this is going to be a fun one because for everyone that's listening, this is going to be like a coaching session more than anything else. Like, we're gonna build James's alter ego to go out and crush the chessboard.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. Like, I'm a good player, and I play online, for instance, and I did my normal techniques when I try to get good at something. I did a plus minus equal. Like, I hired a chess coach. I have my cohort of equals that I play and move up with. And I also give lessons, because if you can't explain something simply, then you don't truly understand it. I divided it up into micro skills. So I'm doing all the things I need to do to kind of what I call to beat the 10,000 hour rule. And online, I'm doing pretty well. But somehow or other in tournaments, just again, like I said, the world's different. I'm different. And I don't know. I don't quite understand it. And yeah, should I be? Sometimes I try your technique. Like, sometimes I'll go into a tournament thinking I'm the best player here. I'm a grandmaster, a top grandmaster, and they're all afraid to play me. But the feeling wears off after a few minutes.
Yeah, well, that's the stuff that we'll dive into. But to your statement before about the baseball player that might be going up to the batter's box, and he imagines himself as another player. Oftentimes, some of the best alter egos have nothing to do contextually with the sport or the thing that people are actually doing. So one of the ones I talk about in the book was a young guy who imagined himself as Paul Bunyan. And the reason was because, and this is actually what gets into why people end up choosing an alter ego to act through, his biggest sort of psychological defect that he had going on was everyone else had hit puberty but him. So he was shorter and smaller. And so when I hear that, I want to try to put someone inside of the beingness of something that is massively larger than life. And this kid, I don't have the exact stat at the top of my head. I think it was 24. He had 24 at-bats in a row where he hit home runs.
Wow. And what's really amazing about that is when you hit puberty, of course, you grow more muscles and you do get bigger and more powerful, and your coordination is better and your focus is better. And so what do you think happened in his brain when you're telling him to, and I don't know exactly what you told him, but what did he do and how did, like, that's amazing. Like, because he's competing against people who are definitely bigger than him and better.
Well, I'll never forget, like when we had our first call after he came back from a tournament in Georgia, and it was the first time where he ever made this comment. He was always a kid who had a lot of confidence. He was a natural leader as well on his team. And then, this adolescence is developing and a lot of his teammates are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And he goes away to this tournament in Georgia and he comes back and he's like, Todd, some of these guys had mustaches. Some of these guys had beards. And in my head, I'm like, now I know why you've been sort of under indexing the last few months. And it's because you keep on looking at other people and other things that you cannot control. Like what you're doing is you're giving them a whole bunch of power over you because you're finishing the statement, which is, this guy has a mustache, which means he's better than me, which means he's bigger than me. Right? It's the story that he was adding to it. And so, automatically, even kinesiology you can do tests on this stuff. You can do muscle testing. His power, which hadn't left his bat, he could still hit a home run, but he wasn't able to, because there has to be an alignment between the mental, the emotional, and the physical self if you want to compete at your best levels. And so my job was always in the mental and emotional spot. Like I always played it between the 6 inches of the ears. So what I want to do is, instead of me try to convince you that, oh, those guys they're not as big as you, or they're not as strong as you. That's really hard to convince people that the self that they have right now actually is good enough. And that gets into a world of therapy, which I am not qualified in doing. I am a peak performance guy. But what I knew from being in the alter ego world and refining this concept almost 20 years ago now, and then being the number one guy in the world on it, when I could get you to disassociate from your identity, disassociate from who you think you are, and move you into the identity of someone and something else, that's where magic would just happen. And so, to your point about, the hand-eye coordination being stronger or the muscle, being bigger and stronger, he hadn't quite hit that yet. But Paul Bunyan had all of that stuff. That disassociative nature of this concept is what helps people sort of unleash or reveal what their capabilities or capacities actually are.
And so again, though, he pictured himself as Paul Bunyan. You'll have to describe to me the process by which he did that. But then what I'm amazed at is that, and I know this stuff works, but that really worked. I mean, he changed his physical abilities. Like you just said, you deal with the emotional, mental, but you made him hit 24 home runs.
Well, I mean, it was so, to your statement before about how, you kind of do this, you kind of hype yourself up to be this, whether it's another grandmaster or whatever. It's not even a hyping up. It is a commitment with a strong intention to be this thing, to show up this way. And so that's why, I talk about in the book, it's so important to give form and substance to this alter ego, to give it a name. It has to have a name, because the moment we give something a name, language is how we create our worlds anyway. So I'm trying to help you create a world in your own mind. And for him, it was Bunyan. Like that's who he was going up as. And then we work on uniforms. I talk about the importance of totems and artifacts. And so he had a sweatband on his wrist, and that sweatband, he would flip it when he would go up to to bat, and it was the flipping of that, because on the other side it had just the name Bunyan on it, and he was not allowed to step into that batter's box unless he was completely and fully embodying what it would be like if Bunyan was in there. Like, just to play that out with him. And that's what I did. It was like, just imagine if you actually are Paul Bunyan, someone who is 16 feet tall, and there's a kid on the mound who's, he's 13 and he's got a mustache. But what's really going to go on in the mind of Bunyan? Like, you can't answer this as little Stevie. You got to answer this as Bunyan. I'm interviewing you. You're Paul Bunyan right now. How would Bunyan, like, it would be like, so what? So what that, I don't care how, if there's a kid with a mustache. And it was inviting him into telling himself a different narrative. And once you can get someone to really engage with that idea, I mean, whatever performance restrictors that person had before, they're gone. And it's not just the kid when the 13, 14-year-old kid playing baseball. I mean, there's so many stories throughout history that I talk about in the book.
Yeah, well, I mean, a typical example now is you might go to a new job where everybody's younger, everybody's the hot young tech person, and you're the older, wizened salesperson, say, but they don't respect you because they're young and hip and you're older. And I bet you those people have similar issues, like in the reverse direction.
Sure. You mean you name the different contexts. This stuff preys on people's confidence or certainty that they can go and do something everywhere.
But in this kid's case, still, what percentage do you think his physical performance improved? So probably part of it was just getting back to normal because he was intimidated by the kids with the mustaches. But then there must have been extra improvements somehow. Like it sounds like
I'll never forget the text message that I got from his dad, because this goes back to about 2009. And his dad sent me a text and he said, "What did you say to Steve?" Steve's not his real name, I'm just using it. So, "What did you say to Steve?" And then in my head, I'm like, oh crap, like, is he doing okay? And I was like, well, as you know, like, that's always between Steve and I. I'm like, why? What's going on? And he said, and this was the start of his streak. He's like, he had 4 at-bats today and he hit 4 home runs. That's not the same kid. Like, he's like, I'm watching my son. It's the same body in the baseball uniform out there, but I know it's not the same kid because he just looks different to me. And I'm like, okay, well, what about him looks different to you? And he's like, it's just, he looks more, the word he said was, he looks more elastic, which when I unpacked that, it was, he's just so relaxed. And I mean, if you know anything about athletics, you know that, elasticity or flexibility is a huge part of power and strength because it's the snap of things. And so he was swinging with a different physical mechanism, which was influenced by the mental and the emotional side of himself.
Wow. And it's so interesting because I'm almost having, and again, what I'm saying about me specifically probably applies to everybody listening to this to some extent or other, figuring out where your story lies in what Todd's saying and what I'm saying. But my experience is almost like the opposite, where in 1997, there were no kids in tournaments. But now, because of computers helping, kids are on computers all the time, and computers are much, they're the best in the world by far at chess. Compared to 1997, they weren't. And kids had time during COVID to study. And after the TV show, The Queens, everybody they spent 10 hours a day. So now it's about 50% kids. There were 0 kids in 1997 in tournaments. Now it's about 50% kids, and they are machines. It seems to me they almost have no weaknesses. And I'm coming in here and I'm, a decent player, a strong player, but I don't know. I'm not playing as well as I think I could somehow.
So, okay. So, one of the things we talk about in the book is, I try to use this Joseph Campbell model of, the hero's journey. And I talk about the ordinary world versus the extraordinary world. And what you're talking about right now is what I'd classify as, there's a bunch of story and there could even be facts in that story that are causing you to feel whether it's doubtful or insecure or lacking some sort of confidence in your ability to go and get the result that you want on that gameplay board.
And it might be subconscious a little bit. Like I don't think to myself while I'm playing, oh, I'm feeling unconfident.
No,
like,
no one does.
Sometimes I'm feeling very confident, but there's something going on in my head.
Yeah. But with that, if we were to only look at games and sport through the lens of skills and competencies, like these kids have unlimited hours in their day because they're not like you. They don't have businesses that they run, or they don't have podcasts that they got to show up for it and whatnot. But the reality, there is a lot more gameplay that is done between the ears that isn't just about your skill set. Because there's an intimidation factor that I would try to employ if I was you on these kids. Or on, what's that?
I agree.
Yeah. And so I would be, and we had kind of gone back and forth a little bit about this beforehand. I would be employing some of that in the way that we'd be designing the identity of Altucher that shows up. And this is what people get wrong about all this. And this is one of the more frustrating things I think about the world that we live in. We have these new memes or tropes or ideas that people have engaged with that are just categorically false. One of them is the idea of being authentic. Okay, so when people hear you and I talk about this, and then by the end of this podcast, hopefully we've built out this alter ego for you, and people go, oh, but is that just James faking it? Isn't that James just acting, or James being inauthentic? And it's like, no one that's listening to this podcast authentically knows who they are. It is such a bad idea that people have been throwing around in the world of self-help and personal development for the last 25 years, which has ramped up even that much more the last 8 years. There is no one you. I can't put James Altucher underneath some sort of MRI or nuclear telescope and find you-ness. You've got many roles that you play in life. The great power that human beings have is the ability to create the self, to create an identity for themselves. Most people are walking around with cloaks or robes of ideas that were given to them when they were kids, when they didn't get to choose who they were. None of us got to choose who our parents were. None of us got to choose where we grew up. None of us get to choose maybe the religion that we, were brought underneath when we were growing up. And yet we're still carrying around the beliefs and the ideas and the values of those people that influenced us, or those, community groups that we were around when we were young kids. That's not you. You say, well, that's what I've always been. Yeah. Well, how's that working for you? Like, I'm not, like, I say this all the time. Like, listen, on most people's podcasts, because I've done hundreds of them, I'm going to be pretty polarizing, not because I'm here to be a jerk to people, but I'm here to challenge the concept of who and what you think you are. And the words that some of us use to describe ourselves are just really clumsy. There is no you. There is no self. There are many versions of you that show up in the context of many roles that you have. And so what I want to do is take a look at, if this role is so important to James, let's build that out in the lens or in the vision of how you most want to show up.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense what you're saying, because you're right. I build this whole narrative of who I am, and all of it's kind of negative. Like, oh, I haven't played in a tournament in 25 years, or I'm much older than everybody, not everybody else, but I'm much older than this new cohort that's playing, these kids. And they've had certain advantages that mathematically they don't have these advantages. I study hard as well, but somehow this story gets built. And maybe my skills are, and when I play online, a game goes like 10 minutes maybe, but or faster. But when I play in a tournament, I play 2 games a day. They're 5 hours a game in many cases, and because I'm actually a little slow. So I'm usually like the last one, or me and whoever I'm playing, like the last one's playing in the hall. And so I'm playing 10 hours a day in some of these. So I build up this story that maybe I'm fatigued, even though I don't really feel fatigued during it. I build this story. So, and I build this story that I'm rusty and the whole thing. None of it's positive.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, so I've got guys in Major League Baseball where we've purposely designed their pitching style to frustrate the batters at the plate because they are naturally a little bit longer with their pre-pitch routine. All I do is say, okay, that's a natural thing that you want to lean yourself towards. Let's add a couple of seconds. Let's make you, now this might be boring to the spectators, but let's add like a couple more seconds because it's really frustrating. And if it gets that guy at the plate out of the game and it gets him not thinking about really what he shouldn't be thinking about, which is really just nothingness, then that's just another notch on your on your side of the teeter-totter that gets to, balance out this power a little bit. So for you, it's like, oh man, I got a game against Altucher. This is going to be a long one. Already, you're going into the game with an edge because people are prepping themselves for a long game. I would lean into that more.
Yeah. So all right. So let's figure this out. Like, tell me what are some of the tools at my disposal here?
Yeah. So, I mean, so I'm going to talk to the listener now. So when you and I were going back and forth at a time, you unpacked already that, when it comes to like online gameplay, no issues because the games are faster, and so forth. And what I said was, but there's also an element of anonymity that's going on there, right? You're behind a computer screen. No one's seeing you, right? So no one even sees that the guy who's there is a few years older than the younger guys that you might be playing with. And you don't even know that person's young yet either, unless maybe they say it in their profile name, correct?
Yeah. I have no idea.
So all of this other stuff that you're bringing into the equation of a live game doesn't exist in the online game. And some of that is anonymity. So, the gamer world is ripe with this, whether it's, I would turn you into, if I was going to prescribe one for you without you giving me any feedback yet, I would probably prescribe a more gamer type identity for you to show up with when you go and you play live, hoodie over the head, right? Where you're just head down. It's like an element of mystery around you, and bringing a little bit more of a persona to the guy who I'm going to be playing with. He's mysterious. And he plays, and he can play for a long time.
Do you think it's works against me that on occasion, or certainly, what happens is before a game is that you get notified about a half hour earlier of who you're going to play, and then you Google the person. In most cases, you Google them to see if any of their games are available to be seen, which they usually are. But with me, of course, when they Google me, they see a lot more. Do you think that works against me, or you think it's something maybe I want to be intimidating, like I have this persona outside of chess, but I don't know, maybe I should be more anonymous?
Well, no, I'm not saying that. So if there's a bunch of information out there about you, what's great about that is the more information creates doubt. There is, and it's been proven even in the book Blink. Right? When someone comes into an emergency room, a doctor's first reaction or first diagnosis of what's wrong with you is typically the most right diagnosis. And when they get more and more x-rays or more information about your ailment, it actually takes them further away from the proper diagnosis.
That's so funny you say that, like, because my chess coach, his name's Jesse Cry, he noticed this with me, is that I keep track of how many minutes I used on each move. And often when I've spent the most time, that's when I make the worst move.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, sometimes you have to spend time to calculate everything out, but when it's more like a strategic long time, like I'm just trying to figure out what strategy to pursue, the more time I spend, that's when it's a sign that I'm going to make a bad move.
Yeah. Well then, but comparatively, it'd be interesting to know what was the first move that you were thinking of playing, but you didn't play. And then what was the move that you did play? Cause, there's not as much actionable data information out of just knowing that the more time I take on a strategy move, I end up making the wrong move on that.
So part of this is part of the persona or identity I build into this is, and just like with the kid you mentioned with Bunyan, he had a wristband that had the word Bunyan on it, and maybe he had other things. So part of it is changing either what I see when I look in the mirror, essentially.
Well, I mean, what this employs is, so there's a natural occurring phenomenon in human beings called enclothed cognition. Okay, enclothed cognition, I talk about in the book, is that we as human beings, if we put on an article of clothing or an item of any sort, and that article of clothing has narrative and story already built around it, we actually enclothe our cognitive traits and abilities in whatever that item is. For example, the story I tell in the book is from the Kellogg School of Management, where they brought a bunch of students one by one into a room, and they gave them the Stroop test, which is an eye test that typically tests your color blindness. But what it is it's got a bunch of words of colors, so yellow, blue, red, etc., except that it's colored in the different color than the word. All right, and because our brains process words faster than colors, what you're supposed to do in a Stroop test is name the color of the text that you're seeing. So if I see the word yellow and it's done in orange, I'm supposed to say orange. Anyways, so they do this test, and they track all the results, and they wanted to see how fast they could do this test and how many mistakes they would make. Then they brought in a second group of kids, and this time they gave them a white coat, and they told them it was a painter's coat. And then they do the test. They had to put on the painter's coat, and then they do the test. Then they bring in a third group, and they hand them the exact same white coat, except this time they tell them that it's a doctor's coat, and they put on the doctor's coat, and they do it. Well, what are the results? Well, the results were that the kids who were wearing the doctor's coat did it in less than half the time and made less than half the mistakes. Why is that? Enclothed cognition tells the story of why. And it's because we all think of doctors as being careful, methodical, detailed. It's sort of an overarching good narrative that most people have about doctors, right? Or that they're successful as well. Some people might have a negative reaction and might disagree, but for the whole, that's pretty standard. Well, the Stroop test, the skills you need to be successful at it is to be careful, methodical, and detailed. So they enclose themselves in the cognitive traits and abilities of a doctor when they put it on. That explains why the same white coat, when you were given it and you were told that it was a painter's coat, didn't impact the results, because they got the same results. The painter's coat kids got the same results as the kids that were just in their plain clothes. Why? Because a painter's coat is creativity, imagination, playfulness, expressiveness. They did another test after that one, and this time it was actually a creative test. Well, what happened to the people in the doctor's coat? Same results as the plain clothes, and the painter's coat people excelled at it. So that's why I talk about in the book the power of a uniform, or the power of a totem or an artifact for you to use, not because I want you to dress up necessarily, just because I'm trying to flick the natural occurring phenomenon that live inside of the brain as we can. I'm a peak performance guy. Some of this stuff is art, right? Like some of the stuff that we're talking about is a little bit art.
Yeah, no, I it's exciting to think about the possibilities.
Yeah, but there's also science as to why. That's why I talk about in the book. I mean, I had to find out the science of why is this one strategy that I've got inside of my peak performance company. And again, like I worked with Real Madrid and helped them build out the performance program, the Danish Olympic team, the South African Springboks, the New York Rangers, PGA professionals all over the world. And then also entrepreneurs and CEOs and leaders. And I'm like, why is this working so much better than some of the other stuff? And it was once I dove into the more scientific side of this, I was like, oh, that makes so much sense as to why this concept works.
And it's interesting that the painter's coat combined with the narrative, the doctor's coat combined with the narrative of a painter, which is, of course, not only associated with playfulness, but with color, that narrative was important in the percentage gain of improvement. And so I'm trying to think, how would I So I appreciate the what you're saying about the gamer with the hoodie and so on. That's like with poker as well. We had discussed previously, and a lot of good poker players have the dark sunglasses and the hoodies so that you can't read what they're doing. I don't quite know how to construct what would be a strong narrative around this.
Okay, so then this is the part of the process then. Okay, so when you think of the qualities that you most want to have to help you win in the game of chess, in a live environment especially, what are those?
I think aggression,
Okay,
combined with don't play tricks because I'm going to catch those and punish you for it.
okay,
Combined with, my memory is going to be enormous, so you're not going to do anything from memory that I'm not going to have already prepared.
yeah,
because in chess you prepare your openings and you memorize, games, maybe hundreds of games, thousands of games that others have played in these openings, and often a game between two masters or higher, or you're playing through moves that you've seen before, and then somebody deviates at some point. And so I want to express that you're any deviation you do, I'm going to be aware of and will punish you accordingly. Those are, I guess, and by the way, and once I'm winning, I'm going to win. And if I'm losing, I'm going to trick you. So you have to be extra careful with me. So that summarizes it all.
yeah. That's great. So, is there any character, person, thing, fictional, literary, that you're inspired by that sort of shows up that way?
I mean, in this particular case, I could really only think of chess players because there is no, like for instance, the Paul Bunyan thing worked well for that kid because Paul Bunyan probably could just walk up to the bat and hit a home run every time. But like Einstein wouldn't be able to sit down at a chessboard and beat, a strong player unless he had been playing for years. IQ really doesn't really have much to do with it. It's just this raw aggression combined with like you want to kill the other person, but with such care that he never has an opportunity to kill you. That's really it. So I guess there's like if I'm trying to bring it outside, in the chess world, I could think of people, but if I try to bring it outside the domain of chess, it's almost like a Bruce Lee or martial art kind of, like, on the one hand, you expect Bruce Lee to punch incredibly hard and know the right points to punch. On the other hand, also, Bruce Lee's not going to be, if you try to hit Bruce Lee, you're never going to land a punch. So I guess there's a comparison there.
Yeah. And so, I'm going to go a little bit meta. So to the listener, what I'm actually doing, like when I'm talking to someone like James and we're looking at the performance identity that we're choosing to take out into whatever the domain is, I'm looking for a source code of inspiration. That's really what I'm looking for. So you say aggression, you say, like, there's certain words that you were using there, like aggression, I want to punish you. And then if I am losing, then I'm going to trick you. I go into my own recesses of my own, story history. I think of, okay, so that sounds a little bit like Darth Vader. I've got the helmet of Darth Vader. If you're just listening to the podcast, I've got Darth Vader behind me. Now, that's actually a working Darth Vader helmet, James, because one of my, maybe mental game issues. So I'm a dyslexic and I've got ADHD. I always resisted against writing. And I love Darth Vader. He's probably my favorite character in the whole Star Wars world. And it's a working Darth Vader helmet. I will put on that helmet and I will write with Darth Vader helmet on.
And that resonates with me somewhat. Like, first off, with writing, so I write every single day and I always read before I write. So I read great writers, so I feel like their essence in me when I sit down to write. And again, I don't mimic them, but I feel like them. And I'm using kind of ideas, but I stick to the domain. I have a hard time going outside the domain. Although I will tell you one quick story. One time, this was like in the early 00s, I had a business and I was going out of business. It was horrible. I was really scared. And I love Star Wars as well. So I got all these books like The Tao of Star Wars and How to Have the Force, like all these dumb books that were self-published, but were great. And I love them. And I decided, okay, every day I'm a Jedi and I'm just going to surrender to the Force and my business will be safe. I'll do all the actions I need to do. That's not what the Force is about, but I'm going to surrender to what's going on around me. And I feel it worked. Like my business was saved. And it was a combination of luck and me taking advantage of the luck. And so that's the one time I went outside of my domain in this kind of picturing.
Sure. And that's sort of the art side of life. Like there's a lot of, for as much as we're a science-based company, there's still a lot of things that are unexplained as to why things happen the way that they do. And we've got neuroscience researchers that I was the first ever peak performance company, back in 2000 to hire neuroscience researchers to, help us build out the best possible training curriculum to help people with the inner game. And there's an art to this, to what your point right there. But the reason I was talking about the Darth Vader thing is because I put that on, and all of my insecurities that I might have about my writing style, if I'm truly embodying Darth Vader, the last person who's going to be worried about whether James Altucher likes my writing is Darth Vader. So if I'm going to really commit to wearing that helmet, because that's actually something I talk about in the book, is that, that phone booth moment or that activation moment. Like you've got to really embody it. Like you've got to live it. You got to live Darth Vader. And I would challenge you on the mimicking side of things, because Paul McCartney, on a recent interview with Jason Bateman and Will Arnett and Sean Hayes on the Smart List podcast, talked about, they were asking him about, like, man, where do you come up with the inspiration for, like, you've got the most number one hits of anybody in history. I don't know whether that's true or not, but that's what they're saying. And he said, I'll tell you, I would sit down and I would read through all of maybe Teddy Pendergrass's greatest hits. And then I would want to write a hit just like Teddy. And I would mimic him as much as I can. Now, he said what people don't get about the mimicking process is I could never be the perfect fake of Teddy because I've got so much of Paul in me. But it was that process of trying to model someone else that allowed me to creatively express myself maybe in a, more prolific way than most of the other artists out there.
No, that's really true. So like, for instance, let's say I'm just going to make up something like, let's say I read Hemingway before I start writing. It's not like I will repeat, when I say mimic, it's not like I would repeat his words, but I would suddenly have a much more minimalist kind of style, shorter paragraphs, shorter, smaller words, one or two syllables. So that does affect my style a lot in that particular session. So that's true.
Yeah. So, okay, bringing this back to the whole aggressive punishment, and trickster thing. So I think of like Darth Vader at that. I also think about the Punisher himself, like the actual comic book character, the Punisher. Now, whether you're a comic book lover or not, this is the fun part for me in trying to find, okay, where's that other source code? Like, where's that source of inspiration that you can use for how you're going to show up and embody a set of certain characteristics, like insert source code. And it doesn't have to come from one place either. It can come from many places. In the book, I talk about my alter ego for when I played football and then college football. It was the composite of Walter Payton, Ronnie Lott, and 5 Native American warriors with the name Geronimo. Now, a lot of that is all very personal stories to me. I went to Walter Payton's camps growing up. Ronnie Lott was one of my favorite football players as well. And I grew up on a ranch in Alberta, Canada, that was when Sitting Bull fled the United States after the Battle of Little Bighorn. And they took refuge on my family's farm and ranch for a little while before they moved off into Saskatchewan. Well, I used to ride around on my horse Cracker Jack as a kid, and I would look for old Native American artifacts. And I always had this deep love affair. So that's my story. So that's why I can't sell someone an alter ego off a shelf. I've got to ask some questions and find like what's the and because it's that emotional connection that you have to that story in your own head that helps to activate just a different side of you. So that's why it's a little bit less intellectual, even though we're using some, an intellectual process. But at the end of the day, there is this magic of, I mean, it could be a doctor that it could be your grandmother, which, by the way, is one of the most popular alter egos that people use for themselves.
I like this notion of the trickster also, someone who's a little devious, because you have to be a little more devious than your opponent in order to win. You have to do something that they all think is bad that you realize in a tricky way is actually good. I'm simplifying the process of winning a game of chess.
Oh, 100%. I know. Yeah. Yeah.
But so a lot of these things resonate with me, including people inside the domain itself, like other great chess, a great chess player. So how would you combine kind of multiple, like the kid you mentioned, he was just Paul Bunyan, it sounds like. And that sounds like the strongest thing to do is to completely, and that's what I would do for comedy. I would just listen to one person in the couple hours before I would go on stage, just to get there, almost like my body would like mimic their motions a little bit.
Well, I mean, so this is exactly what I did when I was first getting into business. I mean, I was an accidental entrepreneur. I wasn't an intentional one.
You watched videos of me then and decided this is not going to be the model. No, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was accidental. People started asking me to mentor their sons and daughters on the mental game. And I was like, yeah, sure. And then I thought I was going to be doing it for free. And people would say, well, how much do you want to charge? And I said $75 for 3 sessions. And that's how I started in 1997 doing this. And when you're that cheap, you're going to get a lot of clients, by the way, too. But in order for me to grow my business, the only thing I knew how to do was speak. I was a 4-H kid, which is like agricultural Boy Scouts. A part of 4-H is you have to do a speech. So it was natural for me to go out and speak. But I was so insecure about how young that I looked, because I was 12 talking about mental game stuff. I don't have any letters behind my name. I don't have 4 best-selling books, which were all these rules I had in my head, kind of like the rules that you're placing in your head as to like what these new kids now are like. I had these rules in my head that if you wanted to be thought of as an authority figure or successful, I had to have letters and I had to have books. But the reality was I was actually pretty good at helping these youngsters. And so in my head, I remembered Geronimo, and I'm like, wait a second, why don't I go and build an alter ego in business? And I went and bought a pair of fake non-prescription glasses, right? People know the story in the book. And I was doing my reverse Clark Kent or reverse Superman. Superman puts on the glasses to become Clark Kent, mild-mannered. I was putting on the glasses to enclothe myself in the traits of Superman. I wanted his decisiveness. And these were all heroes of mine. So Superman, and Benjamin Franklin, who was all about, beyond the whole man of action thing, a man of reinvention. And then the third one was Joseph Campbell, who was a hero of mine, and his was helping me with my articulation skills. I needed to become better at articulating myself. So that's what I'd be doing. If you're going to be looking at a few different people or a few different sources of inspiration, well, what is it about that person that you really like? And that's the attribute that you pull within. Does that make sense?
Yes. And so then let's say I identify 1 to 3 people. Let's say 1 person in the domain, 2 people outside the domain, fictional or not. What do I do then to kind of build them into my consciousness almost?
So now what we do is we take those attributes and those traits, and comic books give us the template on how to do this, where what is the artifact, the wardrobe, or the thing that you put on that can embody all of those characteristics. So for me, I would never, there was such an intentional act of putting the glasses on, because these glasses, if anyone who puts on glasses, that arm goes, past your temple and over top of your ear. And it was almost like there was an on-off switch there for me. Yeah. I would put on the glasses, and these glasses had the characteristics of decisiveness, of being articulate, and confidence. All the 3 things that I needed, because I didn't have those things. but I'm also attaching them to my heroes. When I'm wearing these glasses, I better show up like Superman and Benjamin Franklin and Joseph Campbell. I'm not allowed to dishonor their memory by trying to act through them in this moment or in this environment. And that was what I found, James, was the great activator for other people. It was the idea of when you're going to employ someone or something that you have an attachment towards, the final glue that helped everything come together beyond the artifact or the wardrobe or whatever was the idea of not dishonoring the memory of that or dishonoring the identities of them. Like, I'm going to live through this identity.
That's super strong. So hypothetically, let's say, okay, like you do the Darth Vader. Let's say I'm thinking of a Jedi Knight. I would think of some way to physically think to myself, okay, I'm identifying as whatever, a Jedi Knight. And then this piece of clothing kind of reminds me that I'm switching personas now, and I might put it on right before the game or game prep or whatever. And then during the game, it's very important to kind of, almost sort of remind myself that, hey, I've got to honor the code here, the Jedi code, and or whoever it is I'm modeling. Like, this is the sort of thing this person would do. And then what else? So,
you're in what's really important as a nuance for you, because a lot of people can go, yeah, Todd, I can see myself doing this for like 10 seconds or 15 or 18 seconds. But my golf game is 4.5 hours. Like, that sounds like it could be exhausting for me to try to like really embody something that might not be natural quite yet. And so that's why it's important. So let's say with the baseball player, with him flipping over the sweatband, there was an intentionality of switching into something. So let's say for you, a part of your wardrobe of the trickster was, a pair of funky glasses, let's just say. So like in between even you playing, if you wanted to sort of reset yourself, you could take off your glasses for a second and then put them back on. And it's this, and again, it's like anything. If you want to get good at something, you got to practice it. So I practiced stepping into Super Richard, which was, the name of my alter ego for business. And so for you, that would be another thing to, again, reconnect you back to the intentionality of how you want to play right now. And the one thing that can't be lost in this, James, and this is really a point for everyone that's listening, the reason that this works so well is there is an attitude. If you're going to execute this properly, there has to be an attitude of playfulness that's with this, because playfulness was the one quality that I found that the most elite athletes had over other people. Even in conversations. So Kobe and I connected because of the Black Mamba stuff. And I was actually on my way up to Newport Beach the day that his helicopter crashed, because we were going to be taking the alter ego training and put it inside of his Mamba Academy. And then I was going to help him unpack his real mental game stuff, because his Mamba mentality book didn't do that. It was more of a picture book and a story book of his career. And even Kobe would say that the thing that people didn't get about my mindset was I was playing with you in my own head, like the cat with a mouse type of thing. I knew that my mental game strength was superior to even the elite guys that were out there. Some of them were bigger, some of them were faster, some of them did have better skills than me. But in the grand sort of scope of the game, I knew I had them beat. And that's where, for you, there's an element, I think, of intimidation that could really come into play for you when you sit down. Like, if you embodied the identity of a trickster, really that's intimidating. Like when someone knows that you've got a whole freaking bag of tricks up your sleeve, that's an intimidating person to play against.
And do they feel that if I'm embodying that?
They're of course going to feel it. Like, I mean, That's the transmutation of energy that you get off of another human being in a physical environment. Is like, I've played in so many different sports in different sort of athletic environments, and there are times when you know that you're going up against someone who absolutely believes that they are superior to you, not in like a cocky way even, and it can even come across in a relaxed way, but you're like, oh, this is going to be a long day. This person's going to be tough to play against.
Yeah, and all right, so I should kind of think about who embodies these attributes for me. And again, when it's more than one person,
you're plucking the traits out of that person, or and of that one. Like, so I like that this person does this. I like that this person, and it's not even. And it can be in their mannerisms as well. That's the one thing that you can't lose in this. There's also behavioral mannerisms that you're trying to, borrow from other people as well.
So yeah, so that's interesting. That's kind of related to what I would do with public speaking or comedy, like by watching comedians beforehand. But you called your persona Super Richard. So it's interesting. It's not like you say you're Ben Franklin. It's just that Super Richard has these qualities of Benjamin Franklin and Joseph Campbell and Darth Vader. That it's Super Richard has become this weird combination of all three of those, and that's what you're honoring is that you're honoring Super Richard, who is this breakdown of these three people.
And Richard came from, well, my first name is Richard. It's Richard Todd Herman. I've always gone by Todd. Richard, there was a practical side of it. Richard just sounded more old than Todd did. So that's why I did it, because I wanted to make myself, sound older. Now, I didn't make other people call me Super Richard. That was just the name that that's who I'm stepping into is this person. And super obviously coming from Superman as well. Or, the pop singer of today, Halsey, right? So Halsey did an interview a year and a half ago where they were talking about her alter ego, which is Halsey. Her real name is Ashley. And if you take a look at Halsey, it's just an anagram, right?
Yeah.
But she said, me wanting to do this was so far-fetched. And the fact that I changed my name in the process, I think I had foresight to know that being me wasn't enough. I had to become somebody completely different. At the time, I felt that Ashley didn't deserve to be famous and successful because she wasn't that special. But if I made Halsey, maybe she could be.
Right. So it's almost like she's writing a character and then steps into that character.
And living into that character.
That's what I have to figure out how to do. Like, I feel like when I go to these tournaments, and actually this goes full circle to what you even were talking to me about before, is like, I'm going to these tournaments as James Altucher. There's no way to avoid that. And then I know they know who I am, because sometimes they actually do know who I am, and sometimes they Google me and realize or figure out. So there's no way to avoid me in this, but a little bit I have to somehow.
Well, but the joy, not the joy necessarily, but the fun in that, James, is I would go, the thing I love is they think they know James Altucher, but they don't know James Altucher. And like I said before, there is such a wealth of information out there about you. For someone to sift and sort through it all and come up with a cohesive narrative or a cohesive plan of attack on you would be very difficult. And then when you show up, because again, they think that they know who you are because they listen to your podcast maybe or whatever. And then but the persona or the identity that shows up is different. That's, again, it starts to grind up the gears in people's heads. Like, wait a second, because expectation is an enemy in performance. The moment you expect something to go a certain way and then it doesn't go that way, that's when the mental game side of someone starts to fall apart. And you can use that as an advantage when you're out there performing.
So it sounds like the stronger the narrative that you build, the more persistent it's going to be through, for instance, a 4-hour golf game.
That's exactly right.
And
That's exactly right.
And do you remind yourself on purpose during let's say you're giving a talk or you're coaching someone let's say you were coaching Richard Branson and you feel completely intimidated, or Kobe, you're coaching Kobe. What's happening in the middle of that coaching? Like, do you suddenly take a step back and say, like you said, you take your glasses off and put them on again, or what do you do?
Yeah, you need to have a reset. You need to have a reset ritual. Like, all this isn't routine. This is ritual. You and I talked about this on the first podcast, people leaning heavily on habits. Of course, habits are fantastic little strings that turn into cables that can help support the performance or the behavior that you want. But the best of the best lean on rituals, because rituals is when narrative and storytelling meet the routine or meet the habit. And because we're storytelling and narrative-based animals, without the narrative, it's just it's weak under pressure. So for me, what's my reset moment? How do I reset myself when these glasses come off? I can literally just do it like that, and really quickly I could reset myself because I've just done this for so many, decades now. But in the moment, how do you reset? That's why the ability to take off something and put it back on, like the sweatband or the ring, or it could be just, I've got a guy who wears an undershirt in professional football or in the NFL, and his is just literally because he can't take off his equipment and take off the t-shirt and then put the t-shirt back on and put the equipment back on. But he can tug at it and he can pull, because he's using Captain America underneath. He can pull Captain America away and then snap it back. But there's it's not you're just doing it. What do you mean when you're doing it? And it's that moment when you connect and you realize, oh, I am not really acting through Captain America's qualities in this moment. I'm not allowed to wear this shirt. So that's why he pulls it away, but then he snaps it back because it's there for a reason.
So with the Bunyan kid, he flips the wrist band. What does he mean there?
Well, he's got now Bunyan staring back at him. And because he went and did exactly what I asked people to do, because he didn't really know much about who Paul Bunyan was. So I challenged him and said, go read up on Paul Bunyan and then come back and talk to me tomorrow. And he came back and he was super excited. He's like, oh man, he was like, 27 feet tall and he could knock down trees with a single swing of an axe and all this kind of stuff. So I knew in that moment that he was now emotionally engaged in who Paul Bunyan was. And so when he's flipping over that Paul Bunyan name on the back of the sweatband on his wristband, he's not flipping it over until he's committing to the fact that no, Paul Bunyan is, I am him and he is me in this moment. Like his qualities, his attributes, his skills I've got them. And again, that goes back to just, that's the power of human storytelling. That's why we get engaged with movies and television shows, because we're immersing ourselves into the emotional journey of that hero or even that villain, so to speak.
Do you write stuff down? Like, do you write down, like, this is what Benjamin Franklin's attributes are that, I'm going to live by. This is what Darth Vader, this is the code of the Sith, and I'm going to put it in my pocket. And
yeah.
Why are the Sith stronger individually than individual Jedi? There's only 2 Sith, but there's like hundreds of Jedi, throughout history. The Sith basically are stronger.
Yeah. Well, and you would just like, so even the Jedi, it's such an amorphous idea that being able to close your attention down onto one of them is so powerful. That's why when, nonprofits say, there's, 1 million starving kids in Ethiopia, the response rate is going to be poor. You know this, you're a phenomenal writer. But when you say, have you heard about Aphilua? Let me tell you about Aphilua. And Aphilua was actually a young girl that I sponsored in Ghana 30 years ago. And now I'm reading this story through the lens of just one person's experience.
Okay, just forming this into a process for myself now. Figure out 1 to 3, whether it's role models or characters or whatever that I want to kind of live up to, aspire to be. Figure out kind of what it is those attributes are, figure out what is the narrative, why am I those people, what am I going to think, like how can I justify in some way that I am this person? Like the kid justified that when he turned the wristband around, he was facing Bunyan, it was transforming him. There was a story behind his transformation in his head. For you, there's when you're putting the glasses on, you're going from Todd to Super Richard, and you're that Clark Kent narrative, and then it's practicing that, but really being consistent and persistent with it in those moments where you have to be a peak performer.
And two other things. What is the totem, the artifact, or the uniform that you have? Like, does James Altucher always show up all black with a black baseball cap on, right? Or does he wear the black hoodie kind of thing, right? Like, which is a very natural extension of the Sith or, the Vaderdom world, right? And then what's the name? Who is the one that shows up, right? Like, everyone thinks it's James Altucher. Like when I played football, I was a scrawny kid. I ended up getting a bunch of football scholarships, but I was a scrawny kid. I was 6 feet tall, but I was 156 pounds soaking wet. That's not a weight that, works for you very well in the world of, football. But in my head, I loved it because I was like, you think you're playing against Todd Herman, this 156 pound kid, number 17. You have no idea who's running with me, in me, and behind me, because it's a whole tribe. And it ended up showing up in the way that I performed. There was one game. There's nothing that says a 156 pound kid should be able to break and crack open a football helmet. I did it twice in one game. Now, it could have been that they were just really terrible helmets, but at the end of the day, all my teammates had the same helmets. But I know I played with a force that was way bigger than what my physical stature sort of was.
What if though the way I want to, like, for instance, let's say I wear black all the time anyway, but it really does fit the persona to wear all black. Is it possible to turn the same ritual into a super powered ritual, or do I have to wear something different? To
No, you don't. What you need to do is have the one hoodie that you never wear unless you're playing chess. Right? There's so many different fiction writers that have reached out to me since the book has been out saying, oh my God, I never told anyone this, but no one is allowed to sit in my writing chair because I look as so their totem and artifact isn't a uniform, it's an actual place. It's a object that they sit in. And they're like, I have this whole ritual in my head that I walk through before I sit down in that chair, because that chair is a conduit to a completely different universe that I step inside of.
Right. And it's not just like superstition. It's like they imbue the chair with meaning. And the way a religious person would imbue a religious icon with meaning. It's so interesting because, it's funny. In one of the games or two of the games, I decided I was going to wear a tie, which is something I never do in my life, but it didn't really work. I won one game, lost the other. I didn't really feel it because it didn't really give me any satisfaction or extra edge in my mind because I was wearing a tie. If anything, I felt less of myself wearing a tie. So the narrative and the storytelling is very important, and kind of really researching that and figuring it out. But it sounds like you naturally knew Darth Vader, Ben Franklin. I know you've talked about Superman, and
I know who my sources of inspiration are.
I've never really had like a role model or sources of inspiration. I've always diversified that maybe too much.
Yeah, I know. I think when you dig into this more, because you're a naturally creative person, and by the way, it's not lost on me that you wrote a book called Choose Yourself,
right?
which is literally a lot of the language that I would use. Like, choose yourself, like choose the source of your inspiration, like that you want to show up with out there. But when you dig into this more, or what you do is your awareness starts to open up, you end up finding a lot of these other source codes more easily because you're kind of in this realm right now. And again, like I just can't reinforce, it's such a fun process.
Yeah, I was about to say it's going to be fun doing this, giving yourself permission.
That's right.
To it's like when you're a kid and you play Dungeons and Dragons, and like I remember trying to describe it to my dad at the time. I was like 10 years old. It's like, oh, and then I was a ranger, and I was strong and I was saving people and blah blah blah. And like you really feel like you're that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the beautiful part about this. That was what you said before. I was gonna kind of ping on this. You had said, I really got to like learn this process. No, you don't. You already know it. You already know it because we've all done it when we were kids. Because it's rooted in playful play from the ages of a year to 7 years of age, right? Where there is no concept of self yet. That's a truism. There's no concept of me. And so what do kids at that age need? Well, we need to develop a lot of skills because, we do. And that's when we develop the most amount of skills is in that time frame. Our brain is actually in what's called the theta brainwave state, which is the brainwave state of sort of creative imagination. It's also the same brainwave state that you'll find in people that are caught in the zone and the flow state. Like 5-year-olds are in that state so often. That's why, you've been a dad. And not been, but you are a dad. That's why, like when we yell at our kids, hey, it's dinner time, we got to yell at them 9 times. It's not because they're trying to ignore us. It's because they literally have some of their senses shut down because they're just in play state. And what do we do when we're in our play state of 1 year to 7 years of age? We're a teacher, we're a banker, we play as our favorite sports hero out on the front driveway. And we do that because we know that we have some natural limitations. And I'm like, oh, what could I be if I'm Wayne Gretzky or if I'm Michael Jordan or insert the name of whoever the hero is. So that's why I just say like, you know how to do this. Now it's about allowing this to come back into your life.
Yeah. And I like the idea of imbuing more than one, because it's interesting. So Todd, this has been great. I'm going to totally use this and let you know how it's going. I appreciate
I trust that you'll be following up.
and I know it's a free coaching session. It's why I like having a podcast is that I can ask you to do this for free.
You son of a gun.
And it's the trickster. But also I appreciate you doing this in front of my listeners as well. And I'm sure this everybody who wants to strive for more, I called you because I knew this is valuable. I mean, you've helped me before, and I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing all this with us. I know this is what you do, so I appreciate it.
I'm happy to. You do so much good in the world that if I can only help magnify that more, I'm happy to do it.
Thank you, Todd, and thanks again.
You bet.